Hi everyone, welcome to the newest video on the channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how I paint Cersei Lannister for a Song of Ice and Fire miniatures game. This is a very simple method of how to paint her. There's loads of different things you can do for her if you like, but I just wanted to do it nice and simple. So if you like the way she looks, please consider liking and subscribing, and let's get straight into the video. So as with any of my tutorials, when I'm painting characters, I start off with the eyes. Now this is the easiest way to paint eyes, I think, simply because you don't have the risk of messing up anything you've already painted. So if you've painted your skin tone first to completion, painting in the eyes after is way more complicated than doing it first. So just coming with a white and painted dots either side of the actual eye area, so that you leave a bit of black in between. This stage obviously is a bit messy, or can be a bit messy, so what you can do once you do those initial pupils is use a bit of black to just neaten it up, so it makes it a lot more tidy. And as you can see as well, obviously it doesn't really take me too long to do this whole process, and obviously once you've done, you can move on to the flesh tone. So what I've started to do recently is show all of the paints that I'm using for the skin tone. So I start off with Expert Flesh from Wargames Foundry, and now that the eyes are done, obviously you have to be a bit careful of when you're painting this, so just use a nice relatively fine detail brush. Obviously if you're a bit more confident with your painting, you can use a larger brush, but just be careful around those eyes. Seeing as not everything else is painted yet, you can be a bit you're a bit messy, but try to be as neat as possible when you're doing everything. So on this model, obviously you've got only her hands and face to paint. Now she is a very slender model. Her hands are very small and detailed, so I'm not really sure if I got like a less detailed model than everyone else, or whether this is just how the model comes out for everyone. But the hands, the fingers aren't fully detailed, so I kind of noticed that when I first started painting, so I realised that I'm going to have to be very careful when painting the fingers later on when I'm highlighting. As with the face, it's really nicely sculpted, really nicely defined. Again, just be careful around the eyes. Now it's not really a problem if you get any in the eyes, because you can just go over it again, but the whole reasoning for doing the eyes first is obviously so that it makes it easier in the long run. You can see how much paint I have on my brush when I'm doing this. Obviously I'm moving it quickly, just so that I don't get any parts that are drying before other parts, so that I'm not scratching the surface or anything like that. But just take your time with this. Obviously make sure you go around the whole thing. Don't forget the neck or anything like that. Obviously her chest area is obviously open as well, so get a nice good base coat on as well. Also remember to constantly turn the model and make it easier for you to paint when you're doing this. Obviously it's quite open area, so it's not very hard, but this technique obviously relates to all different kinds of models, making it easier for you to paint just by simply turning it. You can also see that I've not really got like a great coverage with this first initial paint. Now normally I'd say you should go over it with 2 coats, but because we're going over it multiple times with different colours, it doesn't really matter that we've not got the greatest coverage in the first go, so don't worry about doing 2 coats. Just move on to the next base coat, and you can see how the coverage isn't that bad. So with this first initial highlight, obviously we're leaving some of the darkest base coat in the recesses, and now we're kind of trying to define the large areas that are going to be highlighted later on. So the back of the hands obviously should more or less be this whole highlight colour. You can see exactly where I'm putting the paint, so you can kind of follow what I'm kind of commentating. So yeah, the large flat areas on the back of the hands obviously should be more or less covered by this paint, and I'm kind of now blocking in where the finger, the individual digits of the fingers are going to be with this paint, and you can see how it's not really fully defined, so it kind of takes me a bit of doing. So try to use your most detailed brush on these parts. yeah, no, it takes a bit of time, and also notice how little paint I've got on, so I'm not trying, I'm not going over the top with making our fingers look really fat. Um, Again, you can see I'm going to do the back of the hand, making sure I get the back of the thumb as well. So as with the face, the main areas that you want to start focusing on is the nose, the brow, the cheeks, and the lips. So you see, I'm kind of, as I was saying, I'm kind of blocking in those areas. So I'm not going over the top with, highlighting at this point in time. It's just kind of blocking in the main areas ready for the later stages of highlights. Again, making sure I'm being careful around those eye areas. Don't worry if you get any on the eyes. Again, you can fix it. It's just a simple fix at this point in time. Seeing as we're only on the second level of skin, it wouldn't be a massive problem if you did end up needing to, having to fix the eyes, but then get some of that paint on the flesh tone. It's only the second stage, so it's not a problem to fix. You can see how I'm kind of done the face, and really quickly the chest area is the same as well. And seeing as the sculpt on these areas is quite nice, you can actually see the kind of block areas that need to be this initial highlight, just to kind of reinforce the areas that are going to be highlighted to a much brighter level in the later stages. So you can see kind of where the skin meets the actual edge of the clothing. That's where I leave the recess of the darker tone, because that is a natural shade of the skin tone. It will be darker in those areas, and then the lighter areas of skin will be in the more raised areas. Her collar, her collarbone, her shoulder, the tips of her nose and things like that. You can see over her back, it's quite there's a slight bit of recess where her shoulder blades meet, so kind of leave a little bit of a darker tone in that area as well. Make sure you go all the way around again, and I'll just turn it to double check, and that's the second stage done. And once that's properly dry, and make sure it's properly dry before moving on, because it just kind of will scratch the surface, and a drying paint mixed with a newer layer of paint will just scratch the surface. So make sure it's properly dry, and then move on to the next stage. Now this is more or less the same stage as what I did previously, but what I'm starting to do now is kind of define even more exactly where the digits are going to be. Again, leaving some of the recess colour underneath, so it's kind of making a nice gradual highlight with nice smooth transitions. So just take your time with this. Obviously you want to use less and less paint at these stages, just so you have more control of the areas that you're painting. You can see how I've kind of left the initial base coat colour and the first highlight colour underneath, and then painted just fewer and fewer areas with this brighter colour, just to create that greater highlight colour. So as with any skin tones, when I've done any of my tutorials, I do say that you can stop at any stage if you wish. Now, for many people this stage is more than acceptable for a skin tone, and I've painted many figures just to this level of highlighting, mostly just my rank and file troops like Lannister Guardsmen, Lannister Halberdiers and things like that. But with characters, I always said it's better to go up to a higher level of highlighting, just so that you kind of get just a nicer looking character model. Obviously they're the ones that you're going to be focusing on the table more than the rank and file models. And obviously, because characters are one-off models, sometimes painting them to a higher level is a lot more rewarding and fun than painting all of the rank and file models to the same level. So if you don't normally do it with characters and you want to try and experiment with one, Cersei is not really a hard one to do it on. There are a few parts that are a bit challenging in comparison to other models, but if you want to take it up, your skin tone up to another level, then try to just go extra with the highlighting, and you won't be disappointed. So you can see now where the initial blocking of the previous layers is important, because now I can kind of see exactly where I want to be highlighting with these much brighter skin tones. So you know what I'm kind of doing is, again, leaving the recessed color underneath and then highlighting the most extreme edges, you know, the most prominent areas with the lighter colors, just to create that more gradual highlight and make it look realistic. Now you may notice that where I do the initial color of the highlight, that's the area that should be highlighted, but it doesn't look right in comparison to the areas around it. So what I start to do is I feather out the color around the darker areas to kind of create a smooth blend. Now if you're not familiar with the term feathering, essentially what it means is that you use a bright color and create an initial area of highlight, and then use a clean or relatively clean brush to quickly move your brush over the area that's darker, just to create a smooth blend between that darker area and the initial highlight that you've made. Now this is best used on flat surfaces or large areas where it's not quite obvious exactly where highlight should be, and just makes that area seem a lot less of a stark bright highlight in comparison to everything else around it, making a smoother transition of color. So there's plenty of times in this video on the skin tone and also the dress as well where you'll see me feathering out, and I will point it out to you when I'm doing it. Obviously not every time, but you'll notice the areas where I'm doing it, because you'll see me quickly moving the brush from a light area to a dark area with that initial highlight color. So that is exactly what feathering is. So you know, just make sure that you just to make sure that you understand the technique that I'm using. So once the third color's done, what I'll come in now is with a wash. Now this is a flesh wash from Games Workshop, and I use this just to add a nice hue to the skin. Now this is a perfect wash for any skin tone that you're using that's on a human or a live human model. Now if it was a dead model, or you know, an undead model, or someone that you wanted to look like they're kind of almost dead, you know, in this game, and you have Reek, you know, that's the first one that comes to mind when I'm thinking they're alive but they're not, you know, they're ghostly kind of. If you was doing a model like that, you wouldn't do this flesh wash on him, because it adds warmth to the skin tone. So only use this flesh wash on living models that are human, or metallics, you know, gold or metallics and things like that. But this adds a really nice hue to the skin, and also blends in all of the initial colors that we've first used, so that we can create much smoother transition of color. Now you don't want to be making this too wet and too pooled in areas, so make sure you drag it out of areas and make sure it's properly dry before moving on to the next stage. So now with the wash done, what I'm doing is moving on to what is in essence the first highlight, but actually it's the third colour after the base coat. Now you can see how the wash is properly dried now, and it's kind of dulled down all the colours, but it's still, you can see some of the highlighted areas, you know, the areas that we're going to be focusing on with these later, you know, these new colours. Now you may ask, well, why is that? What is the point of that wash? You know, we've done those highlights already, but you know, you can't really see them, you know, properly now. Now initially it does look like it's kind of like a wasted, you know, the initial stages are wasted steps, but actually once you do the first highlight color, you can see how the transition of colors work really well, and also the wash redefines those darker areas and makes it easier for you to see exactly where these new highlights should be going. So it isn't a wasted step. Initially you may think, oh, it's a bit too much, but as long as you don't go too overboard with the wash and make it too dark in areas that don't need it to be too dark, and obviously that's all dependent on making sure you don't get pooling around the areas that shouldn't have pooling, then it works really well. So you can see now with the nose and the face, I can see exactly where the new highlight should be. Obviously I'm being very careful with this stage, and my brush has the smallest amount of paint on. Now you can see here that I'm kind of creating the brow and the actual forehead. Now in male models, what I'd kind of do is kind of define those wrinkles on the forehead. But Cersei's obviously meant to be a young woman, so I don't really wrinkle her forehead. So what I kind of do is I do the brow and then leave a slight bit of darkness above the brow, which is natural for everyone, and then use the rest of the forehead as a smooth surface. You can obviously see that in the video. So it makes her look younger and makes it look a lot more realistic. And you can obviously see where I'm focusing on the cheeks now, leaving a bit of the recessed areas where the hair sets on her face, so it just creates more natural shading and highlighting. And you can kind of see her face coming to life now. Now moving on to the face, move on to her chest. Now be careful, obviously you want to leave the darker colour in the recesses, so just make sure you don't go too overboard in those areas. Again, you can kind of see me creating that initial highlight and then kind of feathering it out a little bit. Now feathering is best done on a paint where it's relatively wet, not super wet. You know, if you're creating, if you're trying to simulate feathering with a wet paint, it's not going to work. It's essentially a glaze at that point, and it's not, and it's you know, it's too much. But if you use a drier paint and try to feather, what it will do is just create surface scratches on the model. So you need to try and find a nice balance between wet and drier. Now what I'd suggest, obviously I'm not showing the consistency of the paint at this point, but what I'd say as a general rule of thumb is before you actually put it on a model, drag the paint across your thumb, and if it goes on smooth and has decent coverage over your own skin, then it's perfect for feathering. If you do it on your skin and the brush hairs get caught on your skin and it's a bit thick, has a kind of a few bits in it, that's too thick. And if you put it on your thumb and it just kind of rolls off and there's no coverage, that's too wet. So you know, using your thumb as a kind of initial palette before you paint on your model is a very good technique. So with the first highlight after the wash done, we move on to the second to last highlight. Now these stages are getting very bright now, and as with any of my videos, I always say just be careful on these stages. Now you can stop now and it'll be more than acceptable skin tone, very nice shading, good you know, representation of the color of her skin, and nice highlights and shading. But these stages just add another step to your model, another add to the level of finish to your skin tone. And you know, it's not too complicated, providing that you have a steady hand and a detailed brush. Now obviously it's easy for me to say because I've been painting for quite a while. You know, it's quite easy because, you know, you just have to have a steady hand and a thin brush, but it's not as easy as that, I do understand. So just take your time with it. Make the model as comfortable as possible for you. Now you can see just there where I kind of turned the model and pinned it against my two hands just to create a very sturdy surface. So if you're struggling with trying to simulate, you know, straight lines or a steady surface when you're painting, just make the model feel as comfortable in your hand as possible. Whichever way that is, you know, you might think, well, the way that I'm holding the model just doesn't seem right for you, but another way that I've never used may be best for you. So use it, turn the model in the best possible way that suits your hand, whatever that may be, just so it makes the most sturdy surface for you to create an even straight line for you to paint. So you can see now where the face is obviously coming together. Again, I'm focusing on the most raised edges. In some areas at this stage, what I'm also doing is kind of feathering out only slightly, but I'm feathering out the brightest colour into the area around it. Now, if you do kind of just focus on the areas of the face and just dot it on, what will happen is it will look well highlighted, but it won't look smooth. So you do have to kind of feather out these colours into the darker areas around it, just so that it creates a nice smooth blend. Now, feathering is quite a common technique, but actually it takes quite a while to properly master and get used to their technique. So try to use it on as many surfaces as possible, so that you get used to how the paint kind of works with the other colours around it. And because it does work different for different colours, skin tones obviously blend quite nicely together, but a light blue in comparison to a dark blue may not feather well into each other. So just experiment with the colours, and try the technique a lot more, because I do believe it is one of the most useful techniques in painting to create a nice smooth blend. So coming on to the back now, obviously I was talking about the shoulder blades. Now you do want to create, obviously, the fact that her skin obviously is nice and tight because she is young, but also you want to leave some of that darker colour in the recess where her shoulder blades meet. So you kind of see where I kind of drag the light colour over both shoulder blades, so that it creates a smooth transition over those areas. Now if I did just leave a dark area in the shoulder blades, it would make her shoulders look really bulky, which I just don't think looks right. So you can kind of see how I did that just to create a nice smooth transition over those areas. So with that done, what I do now is move on to the lightest colour, and you can see where I kind of open it there and got it all over my hands. Just be careful when you're opening paints or things like that. Make sure your hands are as neat, not as neat as possible, as clean as possible. Obviously I know that my hand is covered a bit in paint there, so I'm being careful not to touch it with that area. If you're not confident, make sure that you clean your hands if you do get any paint on, so that you don't touch any areas that you've already painted, because you will get that paint on to those areas even if you think the paint is dry. From your skin onto your model, obviously your skin is oily, not as oily, not everyone's hands are very oily, but they do have natural oils on them, and it will make the paint leave your hand and go onto the model. So just be careful of that when you're painting. So you can see where I'm kind of pressing the figure as tight as possible to my eyes and things like that, so I can create the most even surface for me to paint, because this stage is obviously very, very bright, and I just want to make it nice and smooth and also not do it over the top. Notice how little paint I have on my brush, so I have to constantly go back to the palette and get it on the brush. If I have too much paint on the brush, what I do is I drag it off on my thumb, which is what I was talking about earlier, about using your thumb as initial palette to make sure you've got the right consistency and things like that on your paintbrush. So just use those techniques just to make it easier for you to paint. Now with the face, obviously you can see how quickly I finish it, and again it's the same with the chest area, the hands, everything like that. When you do a very bright highlight, it shouldn't take you too long. Obviously you need to be careful, don't go too quick with it, because obviously you'll be untidy with it. But you can see the areas which need to be highlighted this bright colour, because they're the most prominent lines. And you'll understand where these brightest highlights will go when you're painting the model. Even from the start, you'll see, okay, that area will probably need to be the brightest because that's the most raised edge and things like that. So understanding exactly where the highlights should go from the start makes it easier at this stage to see where the brightest colours are going to be at a later point. You can see how I'm kind of tracing the outline of the clothing and the skin, obviously just defining the difference between the cloth and the skin on her shoulders and on her back and things like that, just to make it look more realistic. And that's her skin done. So I did have a conversation with one of the viewers on this channel about what kind of colour I wanted Cersei's dress to be, and there's loads of different colours her dress is in the show, and it would be nice to do her in a different colour than you see everywhere else, but I just went back to red because that is her house colours, and you know she is a true Lannister. She thinks about herself all the time. You know, so using red as a base coat is a very, very solid colour. So what I decided to do, instead of just doing a flat red as you see almost everywhere, I kind of wanted to create a nice smooth blend between the solid red colour, and you know, a nice bright pink. Now obviously she's a woman, so pink obviously works well on her, and obviously pink stands out in an army where red is a common colour. So it's not too over the top, but it works well. So I thought I'd do a nice transition just to show you how I do wet blending as well. Obviously this video tutorial is very, very short, so I've not gone over the top with Cersei, but it's a nice quick way to show you how I've done an easy, simple dress. So you can see what I kind of do is focus on the red at the bottom of her dress and then make her brighter at the top. Now you can do it the opposite way if you like, or if you're using a different colour, you know, say a dark blue and a light blue, you can do dark blue at the bottom and light blue at the top, because it simulates the same, in essence the same thing, a darker colour at the bottom and brighter colour at the top. Now I'd say doing a darker colour at the bottom and a brighter colour at the top makes more sense, but if you want to, you can do it the opposite way around. So what I kind of do is, you can see I kind of have red and magenta, and I have them both on my palette at the same time. And what I do is I put an initial colour on of the red about halfway up her dress, maybe a little under halfway, and after that I add the magenta in. Now obviously the arm areas and the top of her dress, you know, the kind of the rim where it kind of meets her chest and goes all the way around, that area I want to be brighter, so I focus on those areas with a brighter colour. You can see I kind of reincorporate red into the her torso again there. That's because having it all pink just wouldn't seem like a nice smooth blend, so reincorporate red in areas where you think there needs to be a darker colour. And obviously this is why it's important to have both the colours on your palette at the same time, so you can work backwards and forwards between both colours just to make sure there's a nice smooth transition between those colours. Again, you don't want to go too over the top with reintroducing darker colours higher up on the model, so just make sure that you make sure that there's enough of that lighter colour that redefines that those areas are brighter later on. So you can see where I kind of, the areas that I'm focusing on are mostly the darker recesses, you know, the kind of basically the darker recesses again. And then what I'm kind of do is I go back to a bright colour now, and I go over the areas where there would be normal highlights. So you can see obviously where the arms droop down, the kind of creases on her dress, on the back of her dress, obviously they follow all the way around. There's loads and loads of nice creases on the back of her dress there, so I kind of go over all of them just slightly, obviously making sure that you leave that darker colour obviously lower down. But you can see now where I'm kind of going over the areas on the torso with the pink now, kind of leaving only the darkest, most recessed areas in that red. So you know, when you're wet blending, you want to be doing this, you know, obviously I'm talking quite a lot about all the processes, but you want to be doing this all very quickly. You can see how the paint on the whole model is still all wet. You know, if you kind of went back over it once one colour was dry, it just wouldn't work because the colours wouldn't blend in well together. So once those colours are initially initially painted on, obviously you can see the kind of smooth, you know, more or less smooth transition there. You know, it's not completely refined, but it's there. What I kind of do now is add a purple wash to the whole dress, the whole area. Now you can skip this stage if you want. You can do a red wash if you want to, but I think purple makes it defines the pink more, or the magenta, sorry, and it also adds a nice tinge to the red. Now I've done this purple wash because I've done the same wash to my pyromancers, and you know, I just thought it would work well obviously tie in the whole army together, so it wouldn't make her look so out of place. So yeah, it just works well. Obviously you can see where I'm kind of making sure that there's no pooling in any areas. Now this is very, very important, because you don't want the areas to be depicted as being as this purple wash. They're still red, and they still should be red at the bottom and pink at the top. So this purple wash is just to make sure you have kind of definition between those creases in the cloth, but also making sure that you leave those initial base colors the same color. Again, here you can see where I'm kind of turning it, making sure I get into all the nooks and crannies. Now be careful when you're doing this. You don't want the brush to be flicking anywhere, because what will happen is you'll get tiny little droplets of paint onto the skin. I did talk about this in my Jaime Lannister video, where I had to go over white again because I got it on the white. So just be careful, and move on to the next stage. So again, once the area is properly dry, only do first highlights when the area is properly dry, because it will just mess up. So once the area is properly dry, what I do is I go in with the initial magenta again. Now obviously you want to go in with the first base colors again, because what it does is it doesn't create a very, very bright highlight in comparison to the colors that were already created. Now because we've done a purple wash, the whole area of the dress is obviously darker than the initial base coat. So this redefining areas with a base coat is the best color to use, just to make sure that there's a smooth blend between color. Now it's very, very subtle, so it may take a few layers just to kind of go over what you're trying to depict, but you can see where I'm kind of focusing on the areas of the dress where I kind of did have an initial magenta base coat, but then I'm kind of going over the red a bit more with the magenta, just to create a nice smooth blend, just to represent obviously the dress having a transition of color. So obviously you can do this as much as you like, just to create nice blending on the cloth. But obviously just take your time with it, because the dress obviously is the main part of this model, so taking your time with it obviously is important. So you can see where I'm kind of focusing more on the top of the dress. Like I say, the top of the dress is going to be highlighted to a much brighter pink, so I'm being a bit more lenient towards the top of the dress with this magenta color, because I know that I'm going to be highlighting to a brighter color. But with the lower areas of the dress, I'm using less and less color, so that it creates that blend of color. Now you may think, oh, what's he talking about? You'll kind of understand it at a later stage, what I mean by me using less color lower down and more color higher up, because like I say, you want to be the dress, or what I have in mind is the fact that the dress is going to be bright pink at the top, or more or less bright pink at the top, and then a dark deep red at the bottom. So this all takes time to make sure that the blending is nice and smooth. You can see obviously on these kind of drooping parts of her arms, the detail for the creases and things like that are quite well sculpted. Obviously you kind of just have to wing it a little bit in some areas, but yeah, they're quite well sculpted. So you can see where you want to be leaving a darker color in the recess, and where you want to be highlighting. Again with the arms, obviously I'm making sure that I leave some of that darker area in the the tops and bottoms, and obviously the highlighted areas, obviously the bicep part, or the middle part of her arm, because obviously that's where the light hits it better. With her chest and things like that, the rim around her, the top of her clothing, obviously they're going to be the brightest parts, so you can kind of see the areas that I'm focusing on with these brighter colours, so you can kind of emulate it on your own model if you like. Now what I have seen on some painted models is the kind of trimming around her dress is done in gold. Now you can do that if you like. I think that does work really well on some models. I just wanted to show you, the kind of yeah, just kind of wet blending technique, just to make it nice and simple for you, not obviously going too over the top with loads and loads of different colors. But you can, I have seen really nice ones with gold trimming on the dresser. You can do that if you like, just to add a bit more visual interest if you like. You can kind of see now where I initially started doing the highlights. I kind of did go over that again. I did kind of cut the video off a bit there, but I did kind of go over it again, not too much, but just to show that the brighter color goes further down over those more prominent recesses. More prominent creases. So you can see now I'm kind of moving into a brighter color now. Now what I do is kind of do a little mix between the magenta and the new color. Just get it kind of mid-tone. Generally what I do at this point is just do a 50-50 mix now. I'm not going too complex with it. A 50-50 mix is simple for you to understand, or for everyone to understand. So what it does, it creates a nice colour so that you're not kind of creating too bright of a highlight so that everything looks out of place. So what I'm doing now with this colour is focusing more on the top areas now. You do want to kind of blend in these colours to the initial highlights that you did, but you don't want to be going too far down, because what you'll be doing at that point is just you'll be kind of defeating the object of the blend, which is to create a smooth transition between bright and dark from top to bottom. So just notice how I'm kind of emulating this on my Cersei. Again, just going slow with it, and what I kind of do is I test the brightness in some areas just to see how bright I want to go from the top to bottom, and whether it actually works. So if you find that your color obviously isn't bright enough to create a nice smooth blend, then you can kind of add a bit more of the pink in, just to create a smoother blend. Again, this stage does take although this model only took me more or less about an hour to do, these stages are quite important and quite time consuming in the grand scheme of things, because you have to create a nice smooth blend of colour. Now you can see in the kind of torso area, what I'm kind of doing is creating a transition of colour, and you can see I'm kind of feathering it out. Now the feathering obviously isn't fully refined. You can obviously see the lines that I'm creating by feathering. That's fine, because we haven't fully finished the the highlighting and blend yet. So the feathering obviously just creates an initial highlights for you to kind of look at later on and kind of refine at a later stage, but for this point in time that works fine. You're going to see on the arms where I'm following the initial highlights that I did, but obviously not all the way down, just to create that that nice transitional colour. Now, as I mentioned before, before I started painting this Cersei, I wasn't too sure about the colours that I wanted to do. Now, personally, I think maybe I could have painted this model a bit better, but being critical of your own models is a part of painting. There's always things that you may not be happy with when you're painting a model, and that's fine. Especially when you don't fully understand what you kind of want to do with a model before you paint it. Sometimes it can be a massive barrier to anything, but sometimes you just have to kind of get a generic idea of what you want to do, and then just paint the model and just see how it comes out. And like I say, you might not always be 100% happy with it, but the fact that you've actually tested the model and painted it is a great achievement in the first place, let alone besides anything else, the fact that you've painted the model is an achievement. So if you do have that kind of barrier when you're painting any kind of model, whether it be this Cersei model or any other model from A Song of Ice and Fire, or even a figure that even a figure that's not from A Song of Ice and Fire, painting it in any way, shape or form is an achievement. So you can see I'm kind of taking my time with these bright highlights. Obviously they're not even very, very bright in comparison to the first shot, but that is the whole point. If you did a very, very bright highlight, you wouldn't really have room for a brighter highlight on top. And what it would do is just create a too big a contrast between the initial base color and the darkest red at the bottom of her dress. So that's the reason why I'm creating a very, very gradual highlight on these areas. You can see how I'm kind of using my thumb again as a palette to make sure that the consistency of the paint is smooth enough and not dry before painting it onto the model, so that I don't mess up the surface of the dress. Again, I keep on refocusing on the areas, trying to redefine these creases on the arms and things like that. Again, not going too far down, and you can kind of see, I make mistakes there and things like that, but you can kind of see how it's slowly kind of building up from brighter color to darker color at the bottom. So what I do now is I just use the full undiluted, sorry, it is diluted with water obviously, but it's not mixed with the magenta, the initial magenta color. Now you can see how I kind of create those initial areas of bright color, and then dry my brush and then feather it out into the areas below it. That is feathering. So it's easy to kind of feather out on these creases, because obviously the crease is a prominent line of color. So you can kind of see what areas I'm focusing on and kind of emulate that yourself. Obviously, again, don't go far down with these colors, because you want to be simulating that smooth transition. So just be nice and slow with this. Obviously, you can see me going backwards and forwards so much from my palette to the model, so that the brush isn't ever dry and the paint isn't ever dry, because that will just mess up the surface. Always keep your brush with new paint on, but don't have too much on at any time. You can kind of see now where these slowly building up from a bright color to a darker color lower down. Obviously you can go brighter than the colors that I've gone with, or you can go darker with darker at the bottom if you want to as well. So there's loads of different ways for you to copy the kind of style that I've used on my Cersei, but do it in your own way. I'm pretty sure I've said it in one of my other videos, but I don't think I've ever watched a video tutorial on a model and followed it 100% step by step. Now there's multiple reasons for that. Number one is generally what the problem is that you never always have the same colors as someone else, and also you might look at a model and go, well, I like the way that looks, but I am going to change it just a little bit to suit the way that I paint, and that is perfectly fine. If you use my tutorial or anyone else's tutorial to kind of use it as a use it as inspiration to paint your own models, then that is I'm more than happy if you use my tutorials as inspiration, and twist it in your own way so that it suits your painting style and suits your army. That's perfect. That's exactly what painting tutorials are for, or my painting tutorials are for anyway. I'm just trying to show you how I've my process and how I'm doing it, my thought process, and things like that, so you can kind of think, well, I've always wanted to do this technique, but I don't understand it. But he's taught me how to do this technique, even if he doesn't think he has, and I'll be more than happy if that's the case with anyone. So, again, like I said, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do with this Cersei model, and once it was painted, I was relatively happy with it. So, the fact that I only spent an hour on it was great. So, and also, she's done now. I never have to paint her again. I won't ever, once I get better at painting, or if I have a different idea of how I want her to look, then I'll just buy a different one. But I know that it will never happen. But the fact that I've kind of got her done now, and I'm happy, more or less happy with it, even though I didn't know what I wanted it to look like, is fantastic. So going back to the painting anyway, you can kind of see where the brightest pink colour obviously isn't overpowering anything else at this point in time. Now, the more times you go over an area with a brighter colour, the more defined the surface is going to look. So just take this in mind, and do it if you want to go brighter or darker in a certain area. So at this point in time, I say that my dress is more or less done. So we're moving on to the last stages now. Obviously, that's the only part left to do is her hair now. So if you watch my Jaime Lannister video, you'll obviously understand the stage that I'm going through. Obviously, they are twins, so their hair color is exactly the same. So I use a sandy color. This is called Boneyard from Wargames Foundry. And yeah, I'm just doing an initial base coat. Obviously, because everything else on the model is painted now, you want to be careful when you're painting this. Obviously, the dress took quite a while to do. Obviously, the skin has been nicely blended and everything else like that. So just be careful when you're doing the initial base coat for the skin. Obviously, there's plenty of tutorials that say, you know, when you do a base coat, you can be you know, relatively unneat with it. But when you've already painted the whole model, doing a base coat is exactly the same as doing any highlight. You should still be careful when you're doing it. So just take your time with it. You know, you're moving on to the final stages of the model now. You know, this stage only will take, you know, 10-15 minutes to do. So just take your time with it. You know, be patient, and that's the most important thing when you're painting. You know, being patient when you're painting can make you a better painter. So you can see I'm kind of going all the way around. Now, what I generally do when I'm doing hair or base coating hair is I kind of go around and trace the outline of the hair, because then what you can do once you've traced the outline of the hair is just kind of fill in the middle part, because you don't have to be careful, because obviously you've already done the edges. So you can use that tip if you like. I find it easier to do it that way, but you know, it's all dependent on the model that I'm painting. So you may find it easier to trace the edges of the hair first and then block it in, or just block it all in at the same time and then obviously go around the edges. That's fine. Do it the way you like. Now, you'll notice in a lot of my videos, what I do is I kind of hold my model at one point the whole time. So in this tutorial, what I've been doing is I've been holding Cersei by the top of her hair. Now, obviously, that's a problem at a later stage, because everything else is now painted and I need to paint the top of her hair. Because I have a relatively steady hand when I'm painting, and obviously I've been painting for so long, what you'll notice is I kind of properly emphasize making sure that my finger is well away from the model when I'm painting it. Now, I did get a suggestion in one of my videos about trying to use a handle when painting. That's a fantastic thing to use for any new painter, or you know, anyone that's painting a one-off model and they have a tendency to touch their models all the time. I will actually use it in one of my later tutorials just to show you how much of a difference it makes on your painting. So if you're a new painter, you know, you can see that obviously there's loads of different types of brush handles out there. So you can kind of see the one that I use and just kind of make a decision yourself on whether that's useful for you or not. But for me personally, I'm used to not using a brush handle. I do use it on some models that I'm, you know, when I'm not doing tutorial or anything like that, I do use the brush handle sometimes, but yeah, not all the time. So once the base coat is done, you can kind of see how it kind of has a solid look now. I think I did go over this once more off camera, just to make a more solid color. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. I just think because I've done it on Jaime Lannister, I want the hair to kind of simulate them both being proper twins. So obviously making sure you do the same process makes it look more you know, more of a copy, more of a carbon copy. So yeah, I just did that just to make sure I redefined the blondness of the hair, and now I'm going over with the first highlight color and kind of painting fine lines to simulate each strand of hair. Now, Cersei does have relatively average sculpting on her hair. There are some areas that you kind of have to paint yourself just to simulate those areas, but it's not too complicated. So just kind of do that as best as possible. And again, the best way to simulate every strand of hair with a paintbrush is obviously by using a finer detail brush. Now, if you don't have a fine detail brush, then obviously it may be a bit harder. You know, and you may see in some tutorials that the best way to paint hair is by a dry brush. Do not dry brush Cersei Lannister's hair, because for number one, it's not well defined enough, and number two is plastic. And plastic, personally, I think plastic doesn't have a good a dry brush surface as metal does. You know, there are some plastic models that do have relatively good detail for dry brushing. You know, namely, you know, some Games Workshop models are brilliant for dry brushing. Obviously, most metallic, you know, chainmail and stuff like that, even plastic or metal, is good enough for dry brushing. But I would never ever dry brush plastic model's hair, because it's not defined enough. So please paint it, you know, slowly, individually, with a more detailed brush. You always look better than dry brushing. So yeah, if you want to make your hair look more detailed, or have individual strands of hair, you will need to paint it individually with a more detailed brush. So you can kind of see the areas that I'm doing. Obviously, I've painted well, you know, what in essence is individual hairs, and then I've left the darkest beige colour in obviously the recesses and things like that. Obviously, the Lannister's hair is meant to be golden, you know, golden locks of hair, so I want this to be bright but also not overpoweringly bright like white. So and that's why I chose this kind of bone like colour. Obviously, I've seen a lot of people use yellow for blonde. That works fine. Just highlight it up brighter to make it look more, you know, more golden. So once the second highlight's done, this is the final stage of the model now. Or actually painting Cersei anyway. And be careful with this stage, because it is very, very bright. So only focus on the top parts and the most prominent edges of her hair. You can kind of see the areas that I focus on. And again, this is the exact same as how I've done it on Jaime Lannister. And obviously, because I've kind of done the areas of the individual strands of hair, sorry, it's easy for me to follow those lines and create that natural highlight. Now, because this colour is so bright, what it does is creates a very, very stark difference between that colour and the initial base coat. So what I kind of have to do in some areas is feather it out into the surrounding colour so that it makes a smooth blend. Now, this is simple. Obviously, I've already I've already explained the kind of process of feathering, so you may have to do this in certain areas just by lightly dragging a brush over the area around it. Now, you may say, well, that's a dry brush. In essence it is, but because it's being done with a small detail brush, it actually isn't creating the same effect. It's just an essential overbrush, just to kind of smooth those areas out so it doesn't look out of place, or a hair doesn't look out of place. Again, because this stage is obviously very bright, I'm not going over the top with it, because otherwise it will just make her hair look white, and that's not the actual colour of her hair. Again, obviously make sure that you turn the model, making sure that you get the individual locks of hair that are obvious. Obviously it should be that colour anyway. And turn the model, make sure you've got all those parts done. And that's the hair of Cersei done. So what I've done is I've made a nice space for Cersei, and obviously this is different to all the other models that I've shown, because I wanted her to make her look like she's actually standing in King's Landing. So I didn't even sand the base. It's all just, you know, the moulded plastic with that detail on the bottom, and it's quite nice and simple. So as always, if you like the way that Cersei Lannister looks, please consider liking and subscribing, and sharing with anyone you think may also enjoy the video. And don't forget to paint and play.